This week's plant of the week is the Phalaenopsis orchid. They would have to be one of the most popular orchids for people to buy as gifts all throughout the year. In fact, they are one of the very few orchids that are available for purchase throughout the entire year at all good nurseries. Now, many people buy Phalaenopsis orchids and give them away as gifts, or sometimes they keep them for themselves, but then they find that they deteriorate over a period of time. So one thing to remember is that they don't like to have a lot of moisture around their roots continuously. Their roots are very, very luscious and they're very succulent type, so they will actually rot if they are sitting in too much water. Also check to see that your Phalaenopsis orchid isn't sitting in a small plastic bowl before it's put into something like a more decorative outer pot. Sometimes people don't realize this. They need good drainage. That's why their potting mixture is a little bit more of an open mixture, and you'll find that can drain quite freely. They like semi-shade to a brightly lit position, but certainly they don't want to be in the full sun. They will scorch those leaves. So people who put them onto windowsills, for instance, and find they get large black marks, can get scorched. That's the reason why. Also, that's to do with a bit of extra moisture that's holding onto that foliage. Now, these flowers can be produced for many, many weeks, and they keep getting produced all along the stem. But what happens when those flowers finish? Well, sometimes Phalaenopsis orchids will also send out side shoots from that same flowering spike, and that's where you'd cut that back and it will continue to flower there. They certainly don't mind a bit of half-strength fertilizer if you throw at them occasionally, but usually about once every 3 weeks is sufficient for them. They tend to also trigger their flowering with a little bit of temperature drop. So you'll find that sometimes during winter or late winter you'll get another blooming occurring. That can often happen. So they are beautiful, they are gorgeously hybridized, so you get a delightful range of different colors, from purple to pink to orange to sometimes even lime green, and you can get some gorgeous varieties out there. Look for them out in the garden, in the nurseries, and certainly don't be afraid to ask on their particular care, but they do make fantastic gifts and they are lovely and delightful to have in your yard. So that's the Phalaenopsis orchid. Get one for yourself this week. Hello, today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about terrariums. You know, terrariums have been around for a very, very long time. In fact, since the late 19th century, people have been keeping plants under glass in many different parts of the world, and they've been growing special and rare things such as orchids or rare ferns just to keep them safe. But apart from that, they're also a very beautiful and ornamental feature for anyone to have in their homes. You know, anybody can do terrariums, and there are lots of different shapes and glasses that you can use these days. Some things that I'd like to suggest is, if you are going to have things such as succulents in terrariums, which a lot of people are doing these days, or even small bromeliads, you will need to look at containers without a lid, because a true terrarium actually has a lid. What we're trying to create within the boundaries of a terrarium is a small microclimate that recycles water over and over again. The idea of a terrarium is that you don't have to go in there and water it on a very regular basis, because the condensation that occurs within the actual terrarium itself goes back down onto the plants and re-wets the plants, and everything is recycled like its own little climate. It's quite fascinating what people can do with terrariums, and they are growing with great popularity once more. So maybe you'll be inspired after this segment to maybe try and make something like this for yourself or even for someone else. Right, well, here we have a recipe for making your own terrarium. Of course, the first thing you need to realise, of course, is to have your own jar or some receptacle that you can make a terrarium in. Here I have this beautiful jar. It actually has a lid, so you can access your plant and access the bottom of that jar to make it work for you. You can use any different types of receptacles, even large old jars, or even old aquariums that you may have lying around in your shed. They make perfect terrariums as long as they have a good lid that you can put on top. Now, the next thing we need is a few different organic elements to place into this jar so that you can see how they work. For drainage, we need some gravel at the base of this here. Then, on top of the gravel, we need to have some horticultural charcoal. Now, people often wonder, or they often skip this stage, but they think, why do I need charcoal? Well, charcoal helps to sweeten the soil and stops bacteria from forming, and it's a very important step to have in an enclosed environment such as a terrarium. The next step that we need to put on top, or the next layer, is some well moistened sphagnum moss. Now, sphagnum moss is an organic moss, and you put that over the charcoal. It actually helps hold moisture, and it can sometimes even end up growing within the terrarium as well, only if you have live parts of it there, of course. But it's a very important step to have. And the last one to have is a nice, fine, friable potting mixture. I like to suggest the use of African violet mixture within the terrarium because it actually carries a little bit of extra peat moss within it, which holds the moisture and keeps the soil a little bit acidic, but it's perfect conditions for growing plants in this environment. Now, we've got all of these together. What about the plants? There are lots of different types of plants you can choose, but of course, try and pick plants that are appropriate in size for the receptacle that you want to make your terrarium in. Here I've got a couple of small options. I have things such as the Salaginella, which is a beautiful ground creeping fern, loves shady positions. I also have a very fine form of maidenhair fern here, which you can use. And I have another broadleaf fern. But you can use things such as baby's tears, which are just perfect, makes a very, very interesting ground cover. And even things such as mosses look really, really attractive in things such as terrariums. There are other plants you can use, like miniature palm trees and all that sort of stuff, but bear in mind that some of these plants will want to outgrow their environment, so you will need to look at replacing them. Other plants such as peperonias or chlorophytums, the old spider plant, make fantastic additives to things such as terrariums and even African violets. That's a plant that a lot of people tend to have a little bit of trouble with occasionally growing at home, but they seem to respond well to be growing in the terrarium environment. So next, we'll start putting it all together and you can see the end result.